President Cyril Ramaphosa has called for the Africa Growth Opportunity Act, also known as AGOA, to be extended for longer than the current 10 years. The program, which allows 35 sub-Saharan countries to export certain goods to the US without tariffs, was last renewed in 2015 and is due to expire in 2025. South Africa is currently hosting the AGOA Forum at Nasrec, south of Johannesburg. For more on what's happened and what's expected to be discussed today, I'm joined by SABC's reporter Khayelihle Khumalo. Khaya, a very good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Cynthia, for having me. Obviously, it's going to be a very interesting day today.
Yes.
We saw yesterday with President Cyril Ramaphosa officially opening the proceedings and really emphasizing that AGOA has been a cornerstone of economic relations between the continent and the United States of America, but also raising other concerns, especially, Cynthia, around the still and the citrus fruits. We do know that those particular products are still forbidden from AGOA.
And he also said that AGOA has benefited African countries, in particular sub-Saharan countries, since the year 2000. Tell us more about how that beneficiation has been, unfolding.
A very instrumental program when it comes to the trade between the US and Africa, especially because it goes all the way back at the time of Bill Clinton as the US president to the time of George W. Bush, Barack Obama, the extension in 2014 or 15 or so. But also now what is very key for the African continent is that they are talking about the issue of transformation. For example, President Ramaphosa is saying that Africa should not just be seen as a source of raw materials, but the value-added goods, the manufacturing capability. They also do have a massive Made in Africa exhibition,
yes,
where you do have the automotive sector as well on board, the clothing, the arts and culture industry as well, demonstrating that Africa is really just more than ready to see a recalibrated, a reformed AGOA this time around.
So what has triggered calls for an extension of the AGOA membership? Is it because some African countries still haven't benefited as fully as they would have loved to? And what has been the response by the United States? Are they in support of such an extension?
Well, very much so, Cynthia. Right on the eve of this particular forum, we saw US President Joe Biden calling for the reauthorization, but also calling for the US Congress to support initiative, especially because you do know that the African continent is really seen as this continent with a young population, but also with these burgeoning economies, but also a very important point that was raised as well by the US Trade Representative, Ambassador Tai. She said Biden-Harris administration is really going all out in Africa. But obviously we do know that the rivalry between China as well, that's another elephant in the room.
What about some of the terms and conditions? Have those been discussed? The terms and conditions that the United States has imposed on the AGOA member states and those benefiting from AGOA? Because you'll recall that a few years back, there's been some consternation with the fact that some of the terms and conditions don't actually favor Africa and African farmers. For instance, the poultry products, we were forced to import from the United States, and arguments were raised about how substandard those poultry products were.
It's always a very contentious issue when it comes to the criteria. For example, we saw preceding this forum, we saw some sub-Saharan African countries who were booted out or about to be removed, the likes of Central African Republic, Uganda for their anti-gay laws with the US, because they really do have very stringent conditions. For example, when it comes to the democracy, it should be a very thriving democracy when it comes to the rule of law, but also when it comes to the issue of human rights. The US is very in particular about that. But also, like you just alluding, we know that with South Africa, there was a massive consternation, especially because South Africa on its own, we do have our own very thriving poultry industry. But South Africa really had to really just retreat a little and make sure that the US products are able to come through, especially because something that is important is that, Simpiwa, you do have now the African Continental Free Trade Area. A lot of, ministers from the African countries, they're talking to the US investors, the representatives, to seize the opportunities that are presented by this massive free trade area, biggest one by extension across the world.
And I understand that some pro-Palestine groups will picket outside Nasrec today, demanding and calling for a ceasefire. So what's going to happen there?
Well, that's right, Simpio, especially because we know that the U.S. has been supplying the artillery, the armaments to Israel. So that's why the pro-Palestine groupings will be picketing outside Nasrec, calling for the U.S. to withdraw those funds, but also, most importantly, calling for the U.S. to be a very fair mediator as we see that, the aerial bombardments, the ground offensive is continuing in Gaza, but also the death toll in Gaza Strip has really increased substantially, where it's almost approaching 10,000. It's a massive concern for the globe, and it's something really that a lot of, the delegates, especially from South Africa, were very concerned, saying that they're calling for the cessation of hostilities, especially with a flagrant violation of the international law in this regard.
So what's on the program today?
So more and more negotiations will continue, especially when it comes to the areas of differences, especially with countries like Uganda. Their trade minister is in the country trying to argue for their case so that Uganda is not booted out, but also trying to bring more countries to really make sure that they play a very effective role when it comes to AGOA. Once again, quoting President Cyril Ramaphosa, because he believes that there is underutilization. Some sub-Saharan African countries are not really fully, capturing to the very comprehensive manner the opportunities that are presented by AGOA, but also we'll see a closing ceremony. So today they will wrap up the proceedings.
All right, Khayelihle, great chatting to you. Thank you so much for the update.
Thank you.
Great stuff. That was SABC News reporter Khayelihle Khumalo just giving us an update about the AGOA summit that's currently taking place in Nasrec, south of Johannesburg.